Siblings and sisters and brothers, it is finally here. I am so thrilled to be with each one of you in this digital way on this evening in April. Welcome to Queering Faith 4.0, Mythology and Futurism as Tools for Queer Theology, brought to you by the UCC Campus Ministry at the University of Illinois, and with support from community partners, the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation, the Community UCC Church in Champaign, the UP Center, the University YMCA, the LGBTQ Resource Center at the University of Illinois, Planned Parenthood, and Illini Hillel. All those folks have contributed into making this possible. And this possibility is something that will ignite the imagination and carry you into the worlds that we do not yet know are here. So before we begin, I want to go over a few simple rules. Number one, be kind, be nice, put people first in everything that you do. There are whole human beings behind these screens. There are whole human beings engaging with us all along the way. And allow your imagination the wonder of dreaming. Whatever borders or boundaries this world has taught you must exist, whatever they are, allow them to dissipate and to hope and to dream together. I want to let you know as we go along that there is a difference between how we're going to be engaging with one another in chat and the questions that we'll be asking. If you have questions for the panelists before we begin, do know that at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A that you can put all your questions in, and we will be able to engage them as we're going and bring them into the conversation. Finally, as we're going, if you are live tweeting, if you're Facebook posting about this, if you are engaging it now, or at some later point in the future that we have not yet imagined where you are here watching the recording, the hashtag is #QueeringFaith4. So feel free to use that and keep going. And without further ado, I want to introduce to you the Reverend Leah Roberts Moser, who is the pastor at Community Church on the campus there in Champaign, a very dear friend, and one who holds the imagination of queer liberation since she was just a little person. This I know because we go way back. Welcome, Leah. I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, Chris, it is so good to be here with you and with all of you. Friends, welcome. Welcome to this Queering Faith 4. As Chris said, I'm the Reverend Leah Roberts Moser. I am the pastor of Community United Church of Christ, a just, peace, progressive, open and affirming congregation that is located in the heart of the University of Illinois campus. And if we were gathering in person, then I would be greeting you in our sanctuary, where over 100 years ago, our abolitionist forebears decided that they would move onto campus to that spot so that they could be in ministry with university students. So I want to say that if you are a university student who is in our midst, no matter where you are on the planet, we are so glad that you are with us. CUCC has a long relationship with UCC Campus Ministry, and Queering Faith has become a very special event in our church's year. So welcome. You are really welcome here. Now, if we were in person, this would be the moment when I would tell you where you would find the restrooms. Oh, and to be sure to join us for the reception, because there's a chocolate fountain downstairs. But of course, we're not in person. You know where the bathrooms are in your own house. And oh my God, I really hope that you have a chocolate fountain in your house. And if you don't, maybe you should get one. So that's all the housekeeping that I've got for you. And now I want you to know that I have come prepared with my own favorite fandom things. So I hope you have your favorite fandom things with you as well. And let's go back to Chris. So just a word about one of my favorite co-conspirators in Holy Mischief, the Reverend Dr. Chris Davies. She is a queer mover and shaker and community builder. She is best known in this crowd by her work with the Queer Clergy Trading Cards. I happen to have one of those Queer Clergy Trading Cards right here. And oh, CUCCers, look who's on the back of that. It's Reverend Eileen Gebby, who was ordained in our sanctuary. Chris also has a Doctor of Ministry in Queering Proclamation. She helps to create the world that we want to live in through organizing with Showing Up for Racial Justice, which found in Northeast Ohio, and by serving on the board of Preterm, Cleveland's independent abortion clinic seeking to live into reproductive justice. And God, we need that. And Chris also does that through moderating amazing conversations like the one that we are about to have this evening about justice. Chris and I once baptized somebody in a bar, but that's for another night. Chris, back to you.
We did do that. Oh gosh, it's amazing to me how much our faith carries so far beyond the institutions that seek to hold us confined. So, holding that, I want to give you a sense of what tonight's going to look like. We have two incredible panelists with us here, two of my favorite people in the whole wide world. I'm humbled to be witness at and to learn from them and sit at their feet as they present these things that, you know, little baby gay Chris would have been just totally fangirling over. Actually, I'm doing that now, so I really have nothing else to say about that. And each of them is going to present for 20 minutes of content. Knowing and loving each of these presenters means that I know all of you will want the opportunity to grab a notebook or write and type notes as they go, because we'll have opportunity for questions. First, Dr. Gabby is going to be looking backwards into literature and to fantasy and to the things that tickle our imaginations in the culture today, and giving us things to think through. After Gabby's presentation, Taj is going to pick up and look at science fiction and futurism, Afrofuturism. How do we create an imagination for collective liberation in such a way that we can live into it together? So looking backwards, looking forwards, and together imagining and co-creating the world that God is calling us into. Without further ado, please allow me to give these long introductions, after which each of the panelists will say hello. So I want to introduce Dr. Gabrielle M.W. Bykowski. She is a trans woman author, an academic researcher, and an educator. She serves in the critical role of pastor's wife after Plymouth United Church of Christ in Grand Rapids, Michigan. While marrying into the UCC, Gabby hails from the Roman Catholic Church with a background in liberation theology and female mysticism. Gabby is full-time faculty at the Case Western Reserve University English Department and holds the position of Ansfield Wolf Sages Fellow. In recent years, she's edited a collection on medieval trans feminisms and published a dozen academic articles across the fields of transgender studies, women's studies, disability studies, critical race studies, religious studies, and medieval studies. Whew. I wasn't kidding when I said these are brilliant, incredible folk to learn from and to learn alongside. Gabby has forthcoming books on transgender history and transgender literary theory. In addition to her academic work, Gabby is developing various book projects for the general public, including a memoir and a fantasy novel featuring a transgender protagonist. Welcome, Gabby.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate it. Love you.
I love you too. And I want to introduce to you Taj Smith. Taj is a writer, theologian, leadership coach, preacher, and speaker based in Massachusetts and originally from California. As a Black transgender Christian, Taj's work explores faith, spirituality, liberation, and queer theology and intersectional politics, of which I know you have had your hands deep in the mess of before and will again, if I know you at all. He holds an MDiv from Harvard Divinity School and has a creative passion for music and literature, particularly science fiction. Taj's writing has been featured in the Harvard Divinity Bulletin, on Huffington Post, and Believe Out Loud. He's recently wrote an affirmation guide for qchristian.org on trans and gender expansive identities, and his own story of transitioning was published in Austin Hart's book, Transforming: The Bible and the Lives of Transgender Christians. You can learn more about his work and Gabby's on their websites, which you will get. Welcome, Taj.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And so, without further ado, I want to invite the illustrious, the academic, the brilliant, the wonderful, the beautiful Dr. Gabby to the stage to present. Welcome, Gabby.
Thank you for that, Chris, and thank you for everyone for joining us here today. Beloveds, when I look up at the starry heavens, I think of this truth. Transgender people experience time differently than cisgender people, especially the past. This insight has become key to much of my work on trans history and literature, a theory I've begun to call dysphoric time. According to the 5th edition of the DSM, gender dysphoria is defined as the suffering brought on by the conflict between a person's identified or expressed gender and the gender assigned to them by society. Now, this is key. The definition places the locus of disorder not within the trans person, but in their environment. There is nothing wrong with trans people being trans. Issues arise when social environments misgender them or impose transphobic conditions. Temporal dysphoria is a bit like that. Dysphoria arises when the experience or expression of trans time conflicts with the time period or timeline being imposed on by other people. Consider the forward progression of straight time scripted primarily for cisgender and heterosexual people. The first crush, the first date, homecoming, prom, marriage, kids, pink and blue baby clothes, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, baseball, softball, fraternities, sororities, so on. When you're trans or queer, society pushes you through these cis-het timelines. All the while, you're on your own timeline of queer and trans events occurring simultaneously with you trying to live up to the cis-het to-do list. For trans histories, there's also a temporal dysphoria about looking backwards. What name do you use for the person before they transition? What about the fact that the person wore certain clothes around friends and other clothes around at work? When do you say transition begins or ends? The number of hard questions points to the fact that when we look backwards in time, especially at the lives of trans people, we face a temporal problem of multiple timelines and multiple eras of time, all occurring simultaneously or intermittently. I call this experience or expression of temporal conflict dysphoric time. Fortunately for us, fantasy, speculative fiction, and yes, even role-playing games, I see my D&D players in the crowd, have been proven as useful tools to help trans and queer people imagine and narrate dysphoric experiences of the past. Marginalized people in general tend to depend on myths and metaphors because the words and storytelling tropes are tailored for dominant populations. The English language has been built by and for white Christian patriarchies to describe the experience of white cis het men far more and far better than they describe the experience of anyone else. To speak in ways that we can understand ourselves, marginalized people use metaphors, using words and ideas in ways they were not intended. So too, history has been whitewashed by white Christian patriarchy, erasing, downplaying, or changing the stories of women, trans and queer people, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And so marginalized people have had to read between the lines of Euro-American histories not written for them and read themselves back into history and literature. In this talk, Prophet, Saint, Pilgrim, Priest, Historical Archetypes of Transgender Faith, I want to do just that. I want to offer 4 figures from the past that help articulate my history. This is not a transition story. You won't hear the steps of me coming out, hormones, claiming my names or pronouns. Yes, I am a woman. I knew that by the age of 5, but like trans kids in many red states today, I couldn't get the help or hormone blockers in my youth. My body struggles with irreversible issues brought on by excess testosterone in my teen years because I wasn't able to get that trans affirming healthcare, including a deeper voice that no hormones will rise to a higher pitch. I'll use this voice to lead us through the fog of dysphoria to the prophet who helps me recount my first encounters with the divine, the saint who grounded my faith when as a teen and I began to feel excluded from the church, the pilgrim who brings us back on my journey in a young adulthood back to ministry, and the priest who empowers my adult life. Listen and heed these 4 archetypes, this adventuring party on our campaign into the dysphoric past. Part 1, the prophet. Now, prophets are certainly people who experience dysphoric time. Prophets are not fortune tellers. They don't see the future. But prophets are truth tellers. They see the problem in today's society. They see the ghosts of our histories and the phantoms of possible futures that haunt our present world. Prophets may see visions. Others may hear a special call. Still others may feel a mystical harmony or dissonance in their bones. Prophets queer their world and feel queer in relation to their world. Like bards in many an RPG, prophets are often misunderstood, marginalized, and oppressed in their own time, only to be proven right later in the story. I may have played some bards in my day. A prophet who helps me understand my own temporal dysphoria is Elsa from the Frozen franchise. My sister and I communicate to each other through the Frozen franchise, sending memes and gifts to one another. In our shorthand, she is Anna, I'm Elsa. And Disney has been famous for queer and transcoding their characters, from Elsa to Ursula. Like Elsa in Frozen 2, my mysticism comes both from a place within me and also a place that came to me from a song in the sky. One of my first loves was the stars and planets. I remember the first time I was able to identify Venus floating over my head, and I recall experiencing a strange kinship. I convinced my parents to buy me glow-in-the-dark stars and planets to paste on the ceiling over my bed so I could fall asleep with the heavens watching over me. I could not put into words the pull to space and astral bodies, but if I could, I might have said, like the young prophet Samuel learned to say, "Speak, Lord, your servant is listening." Or else I might have learned to respond like Elsa with a calling, a Scandinavian shepherd call. Ah, that's a very particular type of call. It's called a calling. This is the musical phrase that Elsa hears throughout Frozen 2. Each herd of sheep and other animals learn the special calling of their shepherd. Only those who are called can really make out and hear the song. Elsa heard the call. Samuel heard the call. At my young age, I heard the call to girlhood, to space, and to the spirits beyond. I would imagine sometimes I was not from this world. Like Elsa asking the stars, "Are you someone out there who's a little bit like me, who knows deep down I'm not where I'm meant to be? Maybe I'm from Venus. Maybe I'm from Saturn." I like Saturn because she has all those rings. I have sketches from that time of dresses I designed featuring the rings of Saturn. I was not unlike the wise men or the shepherds led to Bethlehem, or Elsa who followed the music of the heavens to the north, asking, "Are you out there? Do you know me? Can you feel me? Can you show me?" For me, hearing the call of the stars is looking into our cosmic past. Scientists have deduced that by looking for the faintest kind of light in the sky, we can see the universe before everything became so divided, different, and distant. At this time, all that exists in our universe was entangled together. That includes all the things that makes me. In other words, there's a little bit of a transgender spark in the light of the Big Bang. For Elsa, The calling that calls her into the unknown shows herself in Atahallan, a frozen river of memory. There, Elsa discovers that the spirit that calls her is also a part of her, like the Imago Dei, images of God in every queer thing. For me, after years of checking out Space Camp book each week, my mom not only bought me my own copy, she agreed to send me to a week of Space Camp. The fact that I arrived at NASA with a broken collarbone only cemented why I had come. Weeks before I was set to leave for Space Camp, the boys that had been bullying me all year crossed the line, which they would cross again, of moving from bruises to breaking bones when the teachers weren't looking. This young trans girl who had been made to feel like she had no place on this planet arrived at NASA eager to hear and eager to escape back into the cosmic beyond. While I did not become a bard or a singer like Elsa, I too come face to face with my own frozen memories, images that to this day recall the wounds I received for being set apart and told I did not belong. And that brings us to part 2, the saint. Saints are defined as those set apart. While the communion of saints has been a part of the church's orthodoxies, saints themselves tend to be misfits, the marginalized, the queer people in their own time. Like sorcerers in D&D, it's their oddness, their queerness that makes them powerful embodiments of the Imago Dei. They are around a dozen canonized transgender saints whose transness was seen as holy by the early church. For those interested in that fact, a new book has just come out by Amsterdam Press on trans and queer subjects in medieval hagiography, of which I have a chapter. To this day, we have trans saints, although they're not being canonized by the Catholic Church. Saint Sylvia Rivera, Saint Marcia P. Johnson, and martyrs like Saint Leela Alcorn. During my teen years, especially during middle school, I recall both being compelled by Roman Catholicism and excluded by it. For a teenage trans girl, one of the most significant images that Catholicism imprinted on my mind was the crucifix. For me, the body of Christ on the cross remains important for many reasons, but perhaps one of the most significant to my story was this. The crucifix taught me at a young age, this is what happens to a person pursuing truth and justice when you face an unjust world. The image gave me a tool to understand my own suffering. The crucifix affirmed for me that I did not deserve the pain and isolation I experienced every day at school. Ironically, it gave me faith and confidence when the Catholic Church would inflict pain and isolation on me for being trans. The crucifix prepared me with a life-saving lesson. Learn how to suffer well, because suffer you will. After I had let go of the dream of becoming the first trans astronaut, I had considered becoming Catholic clergy, maybe a nun. In fact, there are trans nuns and monks because religious orders and convents set their own rules. In various places and times, Mother Superiors have had the good sense of letting in all variety of sisters, not only their sisters with a C. Consider St. Marinos, a trans man who lived in the first millennia and who joined the gender-segregated space of the monastery. The saint's story tells how Marinos was excluded from the monastery, ironically because he was accused of getting a woman pregnant. If being a man was only about getting the job of monk, then at this point, Marinos would have revealed that he did not have the equipment to get this woman pregnant. But holding true both to his manhood and his monkhood, Marinos remained in prayer outside the monastery until he was let back in to the religious community, along with the son of the woman who had accused him of being the father. At his death, his trans identity was revealed, at which point the community celebrated him as a sacred man, and eventually the Vatican declared Marinos to be a saint. Unfortunately, like Marinos, I too felt myself outside the church. The very church that would exclude me also gave me the tools and models to eventually reclaim my faith. Growing up, I always had 2 sermons on Sunday, one from the priest in church and one from my mother on the drive home. The sermon on the drive home was always more interesting and fiery. My little Polish mother would preach me the sacred insights of a progressive feminist Catholic woman. From her, I learned to love God. I also learned to be critical of the patriarchy. Because of my Catholic foremothers, I wasn't surprised when I began to be shamed and excluded by the church for being a trans woman. Being a woman was enough to be excluded from the church and sent to a pilgrim's exile. Which brings me to part 3, the pilgrim. Trans and queer people often tell their stories as pilgrimages. Geographically, trans and queer people often travel from small towns to the big queer city. We have queer loca sancta, holy places like Stonewall Inn. Sarah Ahmed describes queer orientations as leading off the paved roads like D&D rangers into the unknown, to adventures, towards beloveds who slide off the map. Jose Munoz describes queerness as ever on the horizon in a time and place that's not yet here and not yet now. The road from the closet to coming out is a hard and messy road. The path from transitioning has many steps, twists, and turns. As a young adult, one of the most formative stories about people on a long, long walk features gray pilgrims and even rangers, The Lord of the Rings. In college, I was the girl with the map of Middle-earth on my dorm wall. The stories of J.R.R. Tolkien teach lessons on carrying on even when all lights go out and the world turns to silver glass. Like many trans people today, we might wish that these tragedies had not happened in our time. For so do all who live in such times. But it is not for them to decide. All we have to do is to decide what to do with the time that is given to us. Importantly, Tolkien's stories testify to eutastrophe, the opposite of catastrophe. Sudden moments where, for no good reason, things go from certain failure to surprising hope. One of the most surprising events in my young adulthood was working in college ministry. And when my college came to an end, I joined a dozen students on pilgrimage to Taizé, France. At the start of college, I could hardly have imagined that I would not only be back in Catholic ministry, that I would have no less than 4 positions in our campus ministry: the pastoral council, the communications team, organizing the altar servers, and running multiple faith groups. The revolution occurred when I began to encounter Vincentian brothers at DePaul University. The Vincentians preached liberation theology and social justice, with monks fleeing countries where their anti-capitalist defense of the poor saw them making powerful enemies. In time, the Vincentians convinced me that the most effective way to take down the patriarchy and save the faith was by leading insurgencies from within the church. Tolkien himself was a surprising Catholic. At Oxford, Tolkien stood up to his friend C.S. Lewis and others wanting to exclude women from the school. Tolkien's myths give us women like Galadriel, who embodied dysphoric time with the power to see things as they were, things as they are, and things that have yet to come to pass. With her gifts, Galadriel could have tried to maintain the status quo, freeze time, and stop progress with the power of the ring. Yet Galadriel chooses, like Tolkien, to embrace change. This is a lesson for the Fellowship of the Ring and all pilgrims. Remember the past, but also learn to let it go as you walk forward. Walking around the grape-strewn slopes of southern France with other queer Christians, I thought of the month before the pilgrimage, when the Pastoral Council, the leaders of this Catholic campus ministries, convened at Chicago Pride Parade. The head of the Catholic student leadership included a gay man, a trans woman, and a cis woman. In our final semester at college, we surprised the campus with a eutastrophe, convincing the Catholic ministry to co-sponsor a drag ball outside the chapel. Yes, we did. That was not the future I or Galadriel might have foreseen in the mirror of dysphoric time. That said, this was not the end of my journey. For me, as for the fellowship, Mordor and hell lay ahead. For that pilgrimage, I would need a paladin or a cleric by my side. My husband, the Reverend Rachel Barr, ordained by the UCC and ordained by my love. And yes, I modeled my wedding dress after Galadriel, and yes, included the Silmarillion in our wedding. Yes. So part 4, the priest. Like D&D clerics, priests are all about building bridges between the worldly and the spiritual, the profane and the sacred. Now, historically, this position has been one of hierarchical power with men between God and women. cishet people between God and trans queer people, white people between God and BIPOC. Yet the power of priests does not need to be a hierarchical pyramid scheme. There are also those priests among the people, empowering the marginalized, unleashing their power from the dampeners put on them by the hierarchy. One such priestly example comes to my mind from Marvel Comics, Angela, Queen of Hell. Look for Angela and her lover Sarah, potentially in the new Loki show. Featuring a trans woman spellcaster, Sarah, in solitary confinement in a Christianized Scandinavian hell. Her lover, Angela, a cis woman warrior, tries to free her, only to discover there will be no liberation without abolishing the inequitable justice systems of hell. Together, queer and trans lesbian lovers, Sarah and Angela use sword and sorcery to raise a revolution in hell, facing the trials of fear, chaos, and pain. A big part of my life has been facing fear alongside my husband, my warrior, my Angela, my Reverend Rachel. Shortly after we started dating, the Reverend received a call to a church in Maine. But we were told during the hiring committee that if we told the committee that we were queer, the church would not offer us the job. Likewise, during our time in Maine, we had to pretend I was a friend from out of town. Consequently, I was once stopped by the police when a church member had called the cops on me for being a strange person absconding with the pastor's kids. And the kids were not in a position to simply tell the police officer, "This is one of my moms," while they were detaining me. As a family, we faced the fears of the closet and being outed, trying to do good where we could. For example, at the same time as we were being chased out of Maine by homophobic church leaders, I was getting an invitation to the Obama White House to join other leaders in trans art in order to develop a strategy for helping the US face the fears of transphobia. The next trial of hell that Sarah and Angela must face is chaos. I prefer the term injustice. A little chaos can be kind of fun and frankly good for us, but injustice, let's say. For the Reverend and the doctor, we had to face a lot of chaos and injustice thrown at us, but especially from the 2016 election. At the time, we were living in a bleeding red dot in the middle of a purplish blue Connecticut during the election of former President Trump. Reportedly, members of our open and affirming church were once caught attending KKK rallies that were periodically met on the slopes of the church, until relatively recently. The Klan and white supremacy was overtly present in this community. We would see signs promoting lynching on the streets where we lived. The Reverend and I held firm on our platforms, trying to be a bridge for the moderates in the town to be brought in touch with a much needed spirit of justice and equity. But it was only a few years before our jobs would become so precarious that we found ourselves looking for work elsewhere, receiving a call to move to Grand Rapids, Michigan. And this brings me to the final trial of hell for Angela and Sarah, Rachel and me, pain. In recent years, I've spoken to publications like the New York Times, to government and church leaders, to academics and classrooms about the ways that inflicting pain on trans people has become a political tool and money-making scheme. Weak political groups and failing churches attack trans kids instead of showing true moral power. In our church in Grand Rapids and at my job at Case Western Reserve University, I lead classes on queer Christianity, trans literature, feminism, anti-racism, and disability studies. I help students understand the systems of power that run through our nation like hell, to locate pressure points of pain and pleasure, and to help us metabolize our trauma, to liberate ourselves from the broken myths and histories. As priests who connect students and congregations with the spirit of words, my spouse and I deconstruct the paradise, conquer hell, and explore queer disorientations in the liminality of limbo. Yes, Frozen 2, St. Marinos, The Hobbit, and Angela, Queen of Hell are among the texts I use to teach historical archetypes of trans faith. So to conclude, This queer faith work is important because within the enchanted forests of the unknown, the relics and saints on the outskirts of the church, the shrines and distant mountains of Middle Earth, in the 7 levels of hell, there is the transhistorical sacredness of trans and queer people. I don't just mean that we are blessed children of God despite our transness and queerness. We are sacred, special in the eyes of God because we are trans and queer. We see truths about God, the church, history, mythology that straight cisgender people have been unable to see for millennia. You need us in your schools, your sports teams, your governments, and your churches. You need us, not just our ideas, not just our culture, not just our rhetoric, not just our pictures, not just our stories, and not just our pain. You need us living and thriving. You need us because we deal with time differently than cisgender people, because we can help face the traumas of the past, to read ourselves back into history and reimagine our mythologies. Decades later, I still look up at the stars. Gazing into the heavens, I still try to understand the dysphoric hour we have entered. All around us, I see angels falling from that sky. I see state legislators and national leaders shooting them down with transphobic laws, bans, and sermons and social media rants. The death toll of these angels rises as the state bullying of trans people rise. Recent studies have put the current suicide rate among trans women at 29%. That's 1 in 3. 41% among non-binary people, and 50% among trans men. That's 1 in 2 trans men. To be transgender today is to know other trans people who have passed too young. Despite that fact, we are few, we are called a fad. Despite the fact that we are dying, we are called dangerous. Despite the fact we are prophets, saints, pilgrims, and priests of God, we are called sinful and unnatural. That is why I work in the myths and history of the past. Too many trans people do not have a future in this world. I know that because I teach today to the rituals of mourning. The people I teach today, the rituals of mourning. The people I teach to recite the stories of memory. The people I teach to speak the truths, the forgotten truths, may one day, perhaps not too long from now, be the ones lighting a candle for me. And when they look up to the heavens, I want them to see, and I want you to see, in the faint lights of the cosmos, the 1,000 tiny sparks, the 1,000 tiny glories, the 1,000 transgender angels singing Kolnings over us since the beginning of time. Thank you.
No, I don't know how anybody's supposed to come in after that. and I know it's our work. I know it's all of our work. We are a collective doing this work together because the necessity of your being, the necessity of all of you watching, your being, is that which calls us into collective liberation. I believe it was Grace Lee Boggs who said that we need to, we have to be imagining the future we want to create. The work of this imagination, the work of dismantling ableist racist capitalism, the work of imagining a theological future that holds each one of us as part of a whole, as necessary, as liberative and liberating, is our work. So with a shift, with a reminder that this conversation is also ongoing on Discord, and with a reminder that your questions will help us steer this conversation after Taj's presentation, I'm going to take a deep breath, invite all of you to do the same, to open your minds, open your imagination, and ready yourself for the wisdom and the words of Taj Smith.
Did you know that everything in your life could change at any time? The fact is, everything is already changing. And the question is whether you change with it. And if you do change with it, how? Take me, for instance. A description of me might seem utterly unremarkable. I'm about average height. I have a beard, a little belly. I've got feet, I've got hands, I've got a head on top of a neck. What else is there to note? Oh, my skin color, right, there's that. Sure, yeah. It's a huge part of me, but that's not everything. You see, I'll let you in on a little secret. The fact is, I'm not of this world. Wait, perhaps I mean this time rather than this world? Because maybe this world only exists at this time with all of its peculiarities and idiosyncrasies. Or maybe I'm from a different time because I'm from a different world. And that world is called What If. And that time is called Possibility. I'll tell you my story in a few parts. Part 1 is called Light Projections. Now, between the ages of 4 and 6, on some weekday nights, my mom watched Star Trek Next Generation in the living room after my brother and I went to bed. She would tell us that it was time for her to watch her grown-up show and usher us down the hall. And I would hear that fanfare in the back. Something epic was sounding, something epic was happening. Now, there were some nights that I tiptoed out of my room and down the hall to see what Captain Picard and the crew of the Enterprise were up to. And I watched in awe as the Starship Enterprise soared through space and time, encountering anomalies I wouldn't understand until much later. Now, each episode was an adventure into what was possible, which felt revolutionary to my small self. Now, at this age, I knew imagination was something that kids had and that I would grow out of eventually, but seeing this grown-up show that played so readily with the unknown made me wonder, what if? Now, as a child, I was fascinated by the fact that when I looked up at the stars, I was seeing light that took millions of years to get to me. That something could at once be light years away and visible to my own eyes made me question time in as much as my 4, 5, and 6-year-old brain could understand. What if I actually existed somewhere light years away and the person I saw in the mirror was just the projection of light that made it to my eyes? How long would it take me to reach myself if I had to travel through space to find myself? Now, my family wasn't religious while I was growing up, but all of my friends went to church. And when I first encountered Jesus' story, I thought that Jesus and the star that was above the manger, I thought they might be the same. Now, I wondered if Jesus was who he was because of the star, or if the star was important because of who Jesus was. Which one was the projection? Which one was the celestial being? I found particular resonance with Jesus wandering through the desert, finding his way, learning the ins and outs of what it meant to be human and divine. And I wondered if he felt light years away from himself too. Like if being the Son of God meant that he could never truly get to his essence as a human, and that part of his task was to keep looking. I imagined Jesus' wilderness to be this vast, dark expanse lit by a single spotlight that followed Jesus. The spotlight, of course, was the star. Part 2. Nothing is as it seems. I was 13 when I learned of the world beneath the veil of reality that we experience each day. The Matrix exploded into my consciousness, revealing capital T, capital R, the real, in all its gritty splendor. The idea that there could exist two parallel worlds really needed to be true for me. One, you have this world with all of its rules and its conventions, dot your I's, cross your T's, curl your Q's, whatever. But there's this other world where I could be fully and freely myself. And that's the true world. I had felt that there were these two parallel worlds, but I didn't really have the words to describe it up until that point, until I saw Neo wake up. And just as I had begun to question time as a kid, I began to question my reality as a teen. What if the world I knew wasn't real at all? And what if my reality, the reality that I was living in at the time, was actually the sum of my worst nightmares? I had a recurring dream around this age. I'd be walking through the halls of my middle school, and each building I passed through would crumble until everything around me was rubble, and I'd be left standing in an open field. The sky would darken, and these two ethereal hands came from the nothingness towards me, one holding a red pill and one holding a blue pill. As I began to reach, not really even indicating which pill I was going to take, the hand with the blue pill would just disappear into a burst of meteors. And the red pill would transform into a flaming scroll covered in writing on back and front. Words of lamentation, mourning, and woe, as in Ezekiel. Eat, it would say to me, don't be afraid. Then the ground would explode into an ocean, and I would be left alone, praying that I didn't drown. And each time I awoke from this dream, I felt closer to something within myself that I knew I had to hide. Now, at 15, I was one of the few out lesbians at my high school, and we're veering into the third part, which is called Aliens Among Us. It's one of the few out lesbians at my high school, and thus marked as someone in need of saving by my more fundamentalist peers. To them, being a good Christian meant rejecting who I knew myself to be, and to live into the one true vision for humanity as laid out by God in the Bible. Now, for me, what their version of being a good Christian meant erasing myself to let someone else write their definitions of piety and womanhood on my body. So instead, I rejected that version of Christianity. I raged against it to the point of losing a lot of people that I held very dear. And to the people who told me that they loved me but hated my sin, I was the other, an alien life form who needed to be assimilated into the fold of humanity. And the only way to do so was to accept Jesus Christ as my personal Lord and Savior. I wondered how I looked to those people. Was the fullness of my humanity, my queerness, my blackness, my traumas, my secrets, was all of this horrifying? Was I a beast to be tamed? Rather than ask, I embraced their fear and used it as a shield. The ones who stood by me were aliens too. Neurodivergent, black and brown, skaters, addicts, atheists, runaways, and kindred spirits in queerness. A crew drifting through space with no real destination in mind other than not here. I wondered, what if there exists a place where we could be free to live, love, and heal ourselves from the psychic damage that this version of Christianity did to us? What if there exists a place where we are not the aliens, but where we are home? Now, amidst the fire and brimstone of John's revelation is the image of the new heaven and the new earth. The heavenly city descends to earth, welcoming the faithful while casting out the faithless. And despite being categorized by those good Christians back home as one who would dwell outside the walls, I knew in my heart that I was one of the faithful. I knew that this city was for me and for my crew, those of us who showed our love through sharing our resources, no matter how little we had. And this heavenly city would be a place where Earth's status quo wasn't relevant. We'd have a chance at humanity. In this city, justice reigns. And the newness of this heaven on earth is co-created not only by the Holy Parent, the Holy Child, and the Holy Spirit, but also by a holy community of people invested in seeing this vision to its fruition. And I wondered, what if the power given to humans by the Holy Spirit is the power to create this community and to build this world, the world we live in, anew? Now, the protagonist in Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower, one of my most favorite books ever, she declares that God is change. Lauren Oya Olamina is the daughter of a Baptist minister and an outcast. And during an attack on her gated community, she escapes into the wilderness to eventually build a religious community built on the principle that God is change. She lives with a condition called hyperempathy, which in the post-apocalyptic backdrop of Los Angeles that Butler paints, this could prove to be nothing but debilitating. And even though it's seemingly a burden on her family at first and on the community that's behind the wall, it's actually what makes her sensitive to the way that God moves in the world. It's the thing that drives her outside of the wall and helps her it helps her know that God is change, because she feels that unpredictable mystery of God shifting and changing around her. So her response is to seek out others who recognize the ever-changing mystery and work with them to build a new community. And though creating that community is challenging, the community lives because it accepts this as the central tenet. All that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change. Part 4, choose to live. I transferred to University of California, Santa Cruz, UC Santa Cruz, from a small community college near my hometown, Vacaville, California, in the 2007-2008 school year. I had my 21st birthday, was preparing to end that school year super strong, like super strong. And in February of 2008, 15-year-old Lawrence, also known as Larry, also known as Letitia King, was murdered in Oxnard, California by a classmate who felt threatened by their gender expression and sexuality. Point blank murdered in the middle of classroom. And in a gesture of solidarity, UCSC's queer student groups held a candlelit vigil and speak out. Now, several queer students from Oxnard spoke out about their hometown. The widespread influence of churches that condemned queer folks. One person in particular stood up, said his name, said he was the campus minister, and that he was a gay man. My eyes Locked On. I had no idea these two identities could exist inside of a person. Because, I mean, what? After the vigil, I beelined towards him to find a small group of students with him. And this was the group that I would come to know as FEAST, Faith, Education, Action, and Service Together. The progressive campus ministry that would become my community over the next few years. We spent week after week laughing together, reading scripture, and growing in our own identities. The deeper we explored the theological depths of our scriptures, the more I plunged into an internal darkness. A thick, tarry cloud of shame welled up in my mind, smearing a film of despair across some of the most joyful moments of my college experience. My eyes looked sadder and sadder in pictures until eventually I stopped smiling altogether. And I couldn't shake the sadness. I couldn't see a way through it. I knew something needed to change, but I couldn't see far enough in front of me to grasp what. That is until 2009, when everything changed. A few miles up Highway 1 going north towards San Francisco, there's a line of cliffs that seem to jut up from the Pacific out of clusters of jagged rock. The surf crashes against them, whitewater wake thudding heavily against the coastline, with a sun setting in the background, orange and pink streaks across the sky. It was absolutely beautiful. And it was here that I decided to arrange my exit from this world. See, I wanted my death to be beautiful. So I began planning, visiting the spot each month to write reflections about my life and to hash out details about my death. Change or die was the ultimatum I gave myself. I turned over the possibilities in my head for weeks. What if I changed? What if I died? And now, you see, the timeline here is a little hazy. But I remember being at a conference for LGBTQ college students on the West Coast, and I met someone there who would change the course of my life. It was the official conference open day. I found a seat in a row that hadn't filled up on purpose because I am an introvert and I needed that time to collect myself before a hectic day of workshops. And this person sat next to me. They left a vacant seat, but they sat right next to me. And then they started talking to me. They told me a little bit about themselves, and they told me their name. And they asked me my name, which is a thing that people do. Sure. So I told them my name, and they looked me over like, And they said pensively, "So that's your name. What do people call you?" And I had just begun to start thinking about going by a different name, and I definitely hadn't told anyone about it. Who was this person to just come at me like this and call me out, to just read me in the middle of this room with all of these people? Like, I hadn't even acknowledged fully what was happening in myself. But okay. I looked at them and I said, you can call me Taj, I guess. And that was about the best reply I could muster in my vulnerable state. And they said, "Okay, Taj, I'll call you that." I only saw that person one other time after that encounter. They came to visit me after I had been in transition for a few months. Now, the day I admitted to myself that I am a transgender man, the sky was this like rich cerulean blue with clouds that looked to be the texture of marshmallow cream. It was a beautiful day. The grass was this vibrant shamrock green, and I laid in it with a dear friend who had transitioned before me. I remember asking that friend, "Does the fear ever go away?" And they said, "No, but you learn how to use it." At that moment, I thought in that moment, the image that came to my mind was of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, begging God to take this cup from him. Not my will, but yours. I went to bed that night knowing that everything after that would be different, and that it would be different, but that I would be there to experience it. Epilogue. Ursula K. Le Guin wrote a story called The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. If you haven't read it, it's incredible. You can find it for free online. There's this mythical city, Omeless. It sustains unfettered joy, prosperity, splendor, and just it's full of wonder. It's a place where crime doesn't exist, and people can indulge in their most rewarding fantasies. But the more you read, the more you realize the truth of this city is much more sinister. It's the only way for Omeless to maintain its joy is by keeping a single helpless child in perpetual suffering. Once citizens are old enough to learn the truth, they're initially shocked and horrified, but they eventually just go about their lives accepting that this is necessary to maintain their way of life. But there are some who can't shake the injustice of this trade-off, and they walk away. In her book, How Long Until Black Future Month, N.K. Jemisin reimagines this tale in her story called The Ones Who Stay and Fight. Describes the mythical city of Halat during the Day of Good Birds. It's a local custom. It's all kinds of whimsical and glamorous. And Halat is a city of joy and splendor, much like Omelas, with the critical difference being that there is no tortured child. There is no scapegoat in Halat. She writes, and so this is Halat, a city whose inhabitants simply care for one another. That's a city's purpose, they believe, not merely to generate revenue or energy or products, but to shelter and nurture the people who do these things. Halat is Halat because the people fight tooth and nail for each other's flourishing. Now, I don't mean subsistence. I mean flourishing, thriving, prospering. There is no walking away. There is only working through. Since beginning my transition in 2009, I've accepted that much of my mission on this planet is to participate in the project of building a world in which people can thrive, where people can live their dreams without a random child having to suffer in the shadows. No, in the world I am building, there is transparency, there is honesty, there is reconciliation, and there is so much joy. It's a generous and abundant world rooted in the idea that every person is worthy of love and care. Now, there might be people who wonder whether this is possible, and to you, I ask, what if it were? What if it were possible? I invite you to take my hand, my socially distanced hand, knowing that this will be hard. This will be so hard, but come and build with me. Create this world because I'm telling you that it's possible, that now is the time.
Oh my goodness. Okay. I'm stepping off script here. All y'all back in the backstage, in the front stage, unmute yourselves. Let's give some applause on behalf of those who are not here. Yeah, I'm seeing hands raised.
Yes.
I'm seeing all sorts of information and excitement. Oh my God. Ooh. I'm so glad that this is being recorded because I want to listen to it again and again and again. I want to sit at the feet of your wisdom and learn. I want to take better notes. I want to fill in the pieces I've missed. I want to engage further with you. And I know that the people who are watching want that too. And beloveds, there is a way. All throughout this weekend, there is a Discord server where you can engage this conversation, and Taj and Gabby will be there too in conversation with you. So if you want to join that Discord, join the community, especially those of you who are also in campus ministry one way or another, that is a space for you. Before I kind of hop into some questions, I'm going to name aloud some of the themes that I heard in your conversations. And so as we're getting ready to move into so you can see everybody and we're going into questions, I'm gonna list some themes and see how that resonates with the two of you. All right, you ready? So here's what I heard. I heard themes about queer time, this liminal time, the dysphoric time. I loved that concept. How does that resonate? You can unmute yourselves and let's be in conversation about it.
Thank you.
That came.
Yeah.
I heard. Go ahead.
Something that strikes me is that, you know, me and Tosh obviously talked before today. And one of the things that came up, especially because I do work in medieval studies as one of my fields of study, that I would sort of emphasize the past, and Taj had some more work that was sort of bringing us sort of even from Star Trek into the future. But I definitely think there was so many ways that, yeah, that dysphoric time was operating for both of us. There was futurism in my talk. There was definitely reflection on the past in Taj's talk. And something I like to point out too, and this comes from the fact that I work in a field that I'm going to give you sort of a fancy academic word called necropolitics, which sounds very goth, very punk, but it's the realities of it is very tragic. If biopolitics, which has been around longer in terms of academic conversations, is about the way that culture, institutions, and systems structure how we live, necropolitics is about the way culture, systems, and institutions structure how we die. And it chooses, much like the story that Taj concluded with, who are the ones that will suffer for the sake that others may live. And there's the concept in this field called slow death. It's the fact that certain populations are grinded into the ground to the point where the institution doesn't openly kill them, but they do everything possible to eliminate that person in some other way. And so one of the areas that I work in and the sort of broad scope of the emerging sort of sense of what could be called transliterature, past and present, one of them is unfortunately one of the most commonly produced, too commonly produced, any production is too much, of the subgenre of transliterature, the suicide note. I also look at trans people in the past who died too young, in the distant past as well as recent past. And one of the things that occurs to me is the futurism of the past, by which I mean, for those who look at the past, who can think in a way that's teleological, can think in a way that's straight time. This is the way that straight time, heterosexual, patriarchal time is taught us to think, which is that there's time zero. The world we live in is the inevitable world that we would end up in. What I like to think of is the futures and the possible futures of that past moment. The moment before a certain story ended for a person. All the possible futures that could have happened.
The adjacent possible.
Yeah. Of which this reality is only one possible future. Mm-hmm. And imagining what could have happened in the past, in those moments, what could have been the possible futures that emerge from the past. and being able to see the multiplicity of futures when we look at history, to know that the evil actions of certain people were not inevitable. They could have been different, and how different would our world have been?
I love that concept simply, for a million reasons, but it also ties into transformative and restorative justice, and the ways in which communities are trying to imagine this kind of space going forward. Another theme that came up for me, which relates to the necropolitics in both of your presentations, is about that the cost of liberation is life. The cost of liberation is life, and sometimes deeply personal, sometimes life for whom. So especially in the context of those two stories you ended with, and as you think about that, Taj, I'm curious what comes up for you.
Yeah, I think about the fact that so many folks in the front lines of a lot of the movements and the movement work are people who are affected by the injustices that are happening. And as much as we want to be moving mountains and we're shouting and we're doing this work, we're doing all that we can to bring these issues into some form of societal consciousness. What happens is that like it only takes like a few media outlets or influential voices to label those folks as extremists, or to just utterly dismiss, which makes that work so much harder. So here I just think about like the fact that like it's never death by the extreme racists or like whatever, like that part of society. It's the good respectable people, the people who are the law-abiding citizens, but who also fail to stop and question whether those laws are just in the first place, or where those laws came from. Because I mean, like, I think about it, and like Jim Crow was the law of the land up until like very, very recently. And in a lot of places it still is de facto, but it still is the law of the land. So like, how do we change that? If like, what is the way forward through that? It's actually like confronting and being able to be like, well, I mean, let me rephrase that. I'm not sure what the way forward is if people are still going to be so beholden to something in the past that is clearly so harmful, if they don't have an image for the future. So
I love that. I want all of you present with us to notice that how we structured this conversation was in conversation with the reality of where the world is today, but not reactionary. That was on purpose. We're not talking about the immediate things that can happen now. We are imagining what must be possible so we can imagine that for our great, 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 great grand queers, or whomever they are. I'm going to lift in a question that came through the audience, and these are now kind of focusing into Christianity as a whole. So as you're structuring your thoughts, think that through. There are two questions I'm going to lead all the way through, and because they're related. So from Amari Simpson, where do you think church communities will be in 10 years? What can they do to heal the harms inflicted by other Christians and welcome queer folks back? Related. Ann Musica says, how can we use futurisms, but also looking at our history to reconcile the harm that colonial European Christianity has done to cultures that historically recognize genders beyond the strict Western gender binary? So if you're ready to begin, Taj, I'm going to pass to you first.
I think
Otherwise, you could kick it to Gabby and pick it up on the other side.
No, I mean, these are questions that I think about a lot. I mean, in reference to the first question, where do you think church communities will be in 10 years? I think that's a I think that's a very loaded question. One, because like depending like which communities are we talking about? Like what do we mean when we think of church communities? And like if it's the traditional show up on Sunday in your best like little white church steeple, like that kind of church community, I don't know that those are going to exist, honestly. Like, um, and and I think that church is going to look a lot more casual. It's going to look a lot more collaborative. It's going to look a lot more like groups of people getting together to have conversations about stories that they find really inspirational and moving to them in their lives. Um, and in the same sort of way, I think um, part of the work of imagining the future of what's possible for church, what's possible for communities, is also the part of that work is also being able to look back and acknowledge and really, really reckon with what has been done in the past in the name of Christianity, in the name of America, of the United States, and being able to really to be able to look people in the face and say like, I hurt you, I'm sorry, what do you need from me to make this right? What does it even look like to be made right? I mean, that's my answer. No, Gabby, if you have any.
Thank you. Yeah. Maybe it's because I spend a little bit too much time contemplating quantum theory. But again, it's also the fact of like, I don't think it's possible to know where we're going to be in 10 years. And that's because I think there's a lot of futures that can emerge based on the actions we take today. But that's the really short answer. The more sort of provocative answer, I guess, is I go back to G.K. Chesterton, who, as much as he was a stodgy white English patriarch, he also had moments where he was so comfortable in his stodgy white patriarchalness that he was sort of unexpectedly queer in a way that he may have been aware of or not. I'm not necessarily saying sexuality, but in terms of just some of his ideas. And out of a text that has such a sort of buzzkill name, orthodoxy, there's so many queer insights. I mean, he literally has a chapter called "The Ethics of Elfland and the Eternal Revolution," and I'm like, is this this could be Marx, but and one of his ideas is this: it's that, to paraphrase one of the quotes, Rome, it was not people did not love Rome because it was great. This, again, such a colonial imperialist metaphor for a British guy to make. But he's like, people did not love Rome because it was great. It became great because people loved it. And then he uses the metaphor of a place that he regards as particularly distasteful. And he says, saying you love that thing because of its current state is ridiculous. He's like, it's very, he intentionally picked a place that was quite distasteful. But he says, but if you loved it, and you loved it radically, he says, you would love it enough to change it, to transform it into something that it's not, to transform it into what it could be. I think that distasteful place could be the United States. I think that distasteful place could be the church. And depending on how much we love the church, or how much we love this sort of state project that we call the United States, we could transform it. And I think that power's there. And I agree with Taj in the sense of like, I have very little fear about the faith of Christianity. Christianity, if you go back to its roots and the sort of the wandering of Jesus and the apostles, like, and even the sort of the early church afterwards, Christianity is actually in some ways closer to its heart when it's small, marginalized, and oppressed. And I'm not talking about the like war on Christmas sort of like fear of queers and progressives, not that kind of oppression, but when it is among the marginalized, when it is among and being embodied by the oppressed, the actual oppressed, the faith lives. The faith will continue. The institutions, I think, and this is to bring my answer to a close, I see the institutions at war with themselves, and that's a good thing. The war is no longer between the church and everyone else. The war is now within the church. And it's been in the church for a long time, but more and more denominations are in danger of schisming, breaking up. And I think that's a good thing. I think we need to keep pressing, so that we, if we love that church, if we love that version of the church, we need to transform it.
So the final two themes that I want to lift up before we begin to close this conversation and move conversation to the Discord server are about the power of being known in community. And that in each of your stories and in my story, the work of our liberation is about being known in community and knowing the people who will become our community. Especially queer and trans community. Like, oh goodness. And each of you mentioned the particular lens of the divine that trans and queer people have, the ways in which the access to the wonderment of God is known in our bodies, in our incarnations, in our being, in our knowing, in our communities, in our imaginations, that isn't accessible anywhere else. And God shines through in the most creative, glitterful expression of God that we might know. Whoa. Thank you each so much. Before I invite Nate to come on and speak about the campus ministries, I want to allow each of you an opportunity to say a closing paragraph. Actually, a paragraph. So first with Gabby and then to Taj.
Keep reading. Share books. There's a lot of people out there who will not be convinced by rational argument. I think they will be convinced by relationship. It's not for everyone to maintain relationship with them, especially the most vulnerable. We need to protect ourselves. But people are transformed by relationship and by learning to know people, and I think that will win in the long term. And in place of the vulnerable trans people, queer people who may find these people too toxic to for their life to be livable, give them a book, and not necessarily a didactic teaching book, just a book that has a trans character in it, in their authenticity, and let them relate to that.
I think so much of the discourse focuses on suffering and struggle. We also need to lift up joy and play. I think that if you are a queer person in this virtual space right now, you have the right and the right to experience just complete joy, euphoria, and do what you need to do to bring that about in your life. Cause like, yo, that is a revolutionary act. Also, if you are a person who is an ally to queer folks, ask yourself on a regular basis, how can I help my queer friends experience joy today? And then go do that, because that is just as important.
Thank you so much. It truly is humbling to be a conversation steerer. It really, really is. And I thank each of you for trusting me to hold that space. I'm going to invite Nate to come on screen. Nate has been in the back of all of this, organizing all of the various moving pieces and parts, sending out all of the administrative activism, if you will, to make sure that all of you got to this space. So as Nate is gathering himself to come on.
And I'm here.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. This is the space. This is the time where if we were in the building and we were all together, everyone in the pews at Community United Church of Christ would be jumping up and cheering. And one of the problems with Zoom is that it's so hard to capture the way that there's this communal energy that has been generated by this conversation. We saw it in the conversations that were happening on the sidelines and the Discord server as it's heating up. There's energy coming out of this, which is why it's not world built, it's world building. It's a process and it's an action, it's activity, and it is one that you, the viewers, are invited to join. The Discord has been shared with you. For those of you who don't have access to the chat or any of those other ways, it's going to be on the closing slide screen, and we're going to leave that up so that you can capture that for yourself and then join us in that conversation. Bring your world building, and as Taj was saying, bring the fun, bring the play, bring the enjoyment. Finally, also, if you are local to this area, there's a special thing just for you tomorrow. If you don't know what I'm talking about or have access to that, reach out to me directly. And if you're local, you should have that route. I don't want to overshare because, you know, this is a broad thing, but if you're local, I want you to get in touch with me. You know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so with that, bring your hands together. Let's cheer and let's thank and let's, out of gratitude, express how much this conversation has meant to us. Thank you, Gabby. Thank you, Taj. Thank you, Chris, for being here in this space with us today.
I'm hearing all the cheers. I'm seeing all the hands raised on the digital spaces. I'm also going to say that there's an event on Sunday to which you are invited, and that information will also be put into the Discord as per Reverend Leah. So thank you all so much. From here to the end of the days, know that you are loved, you are worthy, you are enough, just as you are, and you are not alone on this journey of queer and trans wonderment. God has yet to know the fullness of you, and if you're in the exploration, know that there is a space for you here and all over the place. Your people exist. It's a work to find them, but they're here. I promise. From here till there, be well, folks, and we'll see you on the Discord. Bye, everyone. Bye. I know we got a closing slide with lots of information. Nice. Bye, everyone.